we're here for the Transform Dialogues live session at Transform, part of the People Strategy Leaders podcast. My name is Zach.
I'm Amy.
And we're joined with
Brandon Sammut from Zapier.
Brandon from Zapier. Thank you for joining us today live on the floor. I know you're also speaking here tomorrow, so that's really exciting. I'm really looking forward to dig into some of these perspectives that we have on the future of work, talent, tech, people, all these different things. To kick us off, though, can you introduce yourself, maybe share some of the stuff you're working on today and your initial thoughts of, the future of talent? Like, what does that look like?
Oh, sure. So I'm Brandon. I'm the Chief People Officer at Zapier. Zapier is a no-code automation platform where you use automation and AI to abstract tedium out of the work that gets done at all of our organizations. And the upshot for the 300,000 customers that we have is that the humans do the more uniquely human thing. So I personally really affiliate with this mission. My background originally was in education, so all about optimizing human potential. And it's been really neat at Zapier to see how our amazing customers use technology like that to do effectively the same thing in their own organizations.
So when we think about, growing organizations, obviously our talent, our people play a critical role in that. And some of the themes and topics even I've been hearing at Transform in our own network is the role that people have and the relevant skills or ways that they're getting work done. What are some interesting things you've seen about that and changing in this landscape? Yeah.
Well, there's one thing in particular that you could probably spend the whole cast on because I think it's such a massive piece of the conversation around future of work, future of talent. It's inescapable. And the way I sometimes hear it talked about is the rise of the citizen developer. What does that actually mean, right? What that means in plain speak is, there are more and more tools that every day people can use in any function in our organizations to build software. And we should just stop and think about that for a second. That wasn't even really true 6 months ago. And even 6 weeks ago, that looked different than it does today or this week at the conference, right? And you imagine what it's going to look like 6 months from today. It's remarkable. There is not a person in any of our organizations today that cannot build a piece of software without having to know any software development skills that can supercharge their own work, help their teams be more effective. We started to see this at Zapier 14 years ago in the automation space specifically, right? No code automation, that's the category, right? So it's not like the concept is brand new, but the tooling that we now have, both from a cost and ease of use perspective, it just took another leap forward. And I get really excited about what that means for human potential, what each person is capable of, how quickly people can learn to do really valuable things as a way to level the playing field. But, as maybe we'll talk about later, I think it also has some big open questions and concerns around it as well. But generally speaking, I can't think of a bigger kind of trend as it relates to talent.
And before we go too deep into all the implications that means, what that is going to do in terms of engagement or what the role people have within organizations, you shared a really fun story of how this has showed up in real time with your son. Can you share that?
Yes. Yeah. I have 2 kids, a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. Our 8-year-old is just learning how to type and what have you. And he's also, learning how to spell and, put sentences together. Think about, even as adults, the work that we do is usually very interdisciplinary. We sit down to do a task, you're drawing on all these different skill sets. It's the same thing for an 8-year-old too. And seeing some of the ways that, my own people team at Zapier is starting to build software on some of the tooling that's now available, I kind of got this idea. It's well, why don't I sit down with him and we can build something that he cares about? So we sat down with one such product. And the way you imagine on your screen, on the left-hand side is a little prompt box. You can write anything you want in natural language. On the top right-hand side of the screen, you can actually see the code being generated based on the natural language you put in. And then the lower right-hand side of the screen is graphical user interface. It just shows you what's actually being created on the front end. So you have prompt box, back end, front end. And I said, what do you want to make? And he was like, what do you mean? What do I want to make? I'm like, you can make anything you can think of just by writing out what you want to build. And he thought about it for a minute and said, I want to make a Pac-Man game, but with dragons. And I was like, perfect. All right, great. type that in. Like, let's see where that takes us. Type that in. So he types that in. And it takes about 90 minutes to like crunch, And what comes out is like a working version of a Pac-Man game with dragons. And then we went down the rabbit hole. I said, play it. So now we're doing experimentation. It's like, you just tried something. It just created something. Now test it. Do you like how it works? I want this to work this way. I want the colors to be different. I want this to be labeled differently. It's like, well, type in what you want it to do differently and let's see what it does then. And you just get into this like continuous improvement loop. And along the way, he's learning how to be more specific in his asks of the software. If he's practicing typing, like all these things are happening at the same time. Plus, by the way, he's having fun on top of that. So, certainly from a workforce skilling and productivity point of view, there's a lot to like about these types of tools, but it has lots of interesting applications for learning and education at any age. It's just really neat to kind of see that, in practice with my kid.
I love it.
That's really cool. And I mean, that's obviously just like a fun example of what this means for the future of talent. You think about the next generation that's actually learning the talent or the tech in that way. So that's one thing really exciting. But I think as organizations, now that opens up this question at the leadership level, and maybe as you as a HR people leader, as well as the executive team, well, if that's the capability, like what can we do, right? Like it opens up this enormous lane. So I'm curious as a leader at Zapier and maybe on behalf of Zapier or not, like, are there certain things that have excited you or the organization of like, okay, if this is the citizen developer is going to be something that we can engage with, are there certain things that really excited you all about the potential future here?
I think so. Playing on some things that we talked about earlier, one is, when we talk to our teammates across Zapier, a lot of them are nervous about like the role of AI in their jobs moving forward. They ask, thankfully it's a pretty open culture. So it's like, what does this mean for my job security? If not at Zapier, then at my next company or the one after that. The question folks aren't always asking, but that I wake up thinking about, and I know our leadership team wakes up thinking about, is like, because of how quickly things are changing, if someone is at Zapier and they're going to continue to invest in a career at Zapier for another 2 or 3 years, so much is going to happen in that time. Like we wake up thinking about, well, how then is Zapier going to be the place where folks learn the skills and the new ways of working such that they can look back 20 years from now and say, Zapier was a place that like really helps me not only protect downside, like kind of future-proof my career, but also helps me be truly elite, right? In the thing that I love to do at work. And so I think that's part of what we're playing for. Another good thing there is like that overlaps with like, increasing Zapier's talent density, overlaps with Zapier being like as commercially successful as possible, overlaps with Zapier being amazing with customers and helping customers win. So it doesn't feel like we're making like a massive trade-off here. It's just a place we're really trying to look with like where everyone's needs and interests align. And I think this is one of those natural places.
Yeah, I think like we've heard a lot of times from even our network of HR leaders where, there's this fear of engagement with the software because it'll either showcase how, irrelevant maybe part of their work is that can be done by something else. But they might be, whether the organization is pushing it forward, a strategy on how to use it forward, we also found that people are still using it, right? Like on the back end. So how have you all maybe developed that safe culture where we want to take a people first approach to our AI strategy, right? And are there certain tactics or ways of communicating and rolling it out where you've developed that type of culture internally?
There are a couple things that we're finding help, and we're about 2 years in on this journey. In fact, it was March of 2023 that we declared what we called a code red at Zapier. It was the first time we had ever done that. It was 6 months after ChatGPT launch. It was so clear that was not only going to change how the work needed to get done at the company, but maybe even more near term, it's going to change how we needed to think about our own product and how to help our customers. And so, by the way, that call to action, that code red, was not popular universally at the time. Some folks thought it was alarmist and it made folks uncomfortable. And not everyone, but enough folks. And we make space for that. That's, I think, a very natural thing. So there's no, shaming or trying to make people think a certain way about it. It's like, it's a little example where like sometimes leadership, you gotta show folks, you can't just tell folks. And so we did a couple things. One, we set up a couple new Slack channels and a place where folks can just share ideas and use cases that they were building with automation and AI. We set up a Slack channel expressly so that folks who were new to the whole topic could ask any question, right? Any question, right? It was in fact kind of a newbies oriented channel. And then we asked a couple of our power users to basically staff the channel, say part of your job now, like X allocation, is to answer all these questions. Because even though you're great at building this stuff directly, you'll never be able to have as much impact as helping the majority of the company kind of come along with you. And so this is part of your job, right? It's like helping everyone else come along. All our hack weeks for that year were oriented towards AI use cases. For example, we cleared the lane from a security and IT perspective, a lot of thoughtfulness around that. So not a, free for all, but in a matter of very clear managers, like in a number of weeks, we need to be clear with folks about what tools you can use in what ways. If we need to write a big check to get enterprise grade, LLM accounts that, our data isn't, training some model somewhere, that we're going to write that check. And it's a topic of, daily conversation for months. And so we had some of that in place. Now, there's one other thing though, because at the end of the day, all of that is great, but it doesn't answer the question that a lot of folks still end up asking, which is this going to replace my job? And we were really, I think it's really important for management teams to be clear and very direct on their answers to that question, no matter what the answer is, including if the answer is, we don't know yet, but here's what we're doing to find out. I don't think at this point, based on what we've seen now, by the way, that was 2 years ago. So now fast forward 2 years, I think it's even more obvious this is going to impact a lot of, every organization and almost every conceivable job. I don't think it's acceptable now for management to say, we don't know, period. I think it has to be, we don't know yet. And here's how we're working to get working answers for our company. But when leaders have the answers to those questions, even if they point to uncomfortable places, I think we owe it to our teams to lead with that truth and then show with our actions, why that's the right decision for the organization, even if it creates discomfort, disorientation.
Yeah, there's a lot of power in that level of transparency and vulnerability into where we are and where we're going, right? And that it can be a really powerful engaging factor, even if it's something uncomfortable for them to hear, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like you've built an amazing culture around this where you've embraced it. You've encouraged your teams to embrace it. What advice would you give to an organization or to somebody in your role who recognizes this is the future and has somebody in the leadership team that is resistant and is scared to take this leap? How would you recommend they approach it? Because they have to, right? If they don't right now, they're already behind.
So I think you just named, you made me think of two things. I think you just named the first one, which is like lead with that reality, which is like, in the most immediate term, it is still going to seem a little discretionary. Like you can keep running and even growing a business without really taking this by the horns in the short term. But what's going to happen, what we're already seeing is that, take any given problem space or product space, even including ones represented here at Transform this week, you have, let's say you're a relatively established company that's built on an old stack, right? You have folks coming up into the same product space, building on the latest tooling with much smaller teams at a much different set of economics. And so, if it took you, 1,000 employees to scale a product that can do X, Y, Z things, maybe a 20-person team today can do the same thing and do it pretty quickly and catch up. If you don't come along, it's going to be really hard because they can undercut your pricing because their cost base is a lot lower. You kind of see how the movie plays out. So I think you nailed the first one. And the second one, in terms of like making this really practical, is actually to anchor, use of automation and AI as a medium for achieving the company's existing goals. Because these are tools, and just like all the tools that came before them, including email and Zoom and Slack and you name it, these are ways to accomplish goals. They are not the goals themselves. We found that a really helpful way to like ground the conversation, right? Because folks who may be resistant or certainly typically feel very accountable for the company being successful against its existing goals. And so then if you can show examples of how, hey, if we were able to use this in this way, or if we were to skill this team up so they could do this work like this, wow, would we have, then this goal, which seems kind of stretchy today, maybe it kind of seems pretty small by comparison. And that's that the language of existing goals and accountabilities is a really nice bridge to go from, a somewhat misaligned, management team to one that like still may not have all the answers on how to get there, but at least can kind of like see the opportunity for what it is.
Have you instituted any kind of reward and recognition program internally around people that are really grabbing hold and advancing AI in your organization?
Yes, not monetary, but very much in terms of visibility. It's one of those classic things where, like, you show the company what matters through what you recognize, and this is like classic place. So whether it's the focus of Hack Weeks and the winners of Hack Weeks and what they've been building, or we have like a demos channel where folks ship demos and what have you, and the things that we really celebrate and loft up there. The way we use company, actually, even at our all company summit, Zapier is an all remote company. We have folks in 42 countries, but we do come together in person once every year for a full week. And we just did it last week in New Orleans, and we spent a whole day. It's precious time, right? We spent one of those whole days just building together with automation and AI, and we did awards at the end of that. And what was here, and just to bring it back to this notion of the citizen developer, if you looked at the list of people who were awarded, and this was not engineered, this is just based on the best stuff that got shipped that day. It wasn't just the product team. It wasn't just the engineering team. There were folks from finance and the people team. It's like, this is places where, any team can be a leader in this area, which is kind of a good point.
It kind of brings in this whole new level of creativity across the organization, where it's like, well, I would love to build these things, but I don't have maybe that specialized competency of coding. So it's really hard for me to build what I'm imagining, right? So I think that's really exciting. I would love to kind of follow you. Kind of started talking about this a little bit, but as now we have these capabilities and we're thinking about executing our strategy against the talent that we have, the tools that we have access to. It reminds me of a conversation I had with one of our other CPOs, which was, first they brought up the competency of the organization to be AI trained and engaged and helping people lead the AI strategy. But now they're at this like decision making where, okay, if we're thinking about our strategy in the future, we are either thinking about, do we need to increase our headcount to achieve this strategy? Or do we actually increase our headcount in a sense of like AI agents, right? And we're counting that as a headcount as a part of our strategy. And that might be more of a focus in some cases. And we're not going to actually increase our people headcount. So just curious of your thoughts on that. Like, is that a way that you're starting to evaluate how you execute your strategy? Is there a certain, kind of perspective on that piece that you have?
Yeah. Yes. Sure answer is yes. And I can tell you really practically in two different ways what it looks like. The first is we're increasingly using a framework to help us make these types of decisions. So like when we have a need, a capability, we need to be more capable of, it could be anything like, shipping product or hiring, whatever the case may be. It's like, how are we going to deploy that capability? And of course, the typical way, even a lot of us think about today is, well, hire someone. Maybe if we think about it for a minute, we could, flex some talent across the organization. That's really good too. It's Zapier, we're increasingly using a framework. I think a lot of us are familiar with the build or buy framework. Those are like 2 Bs, right? Build or buy. We've added 2 more, and we're starting to use that to help make these decisions. So we have build and buy. We've added borrow, which a little bit, it's like flexing talent. So instead of hiring another head from the outside, it's like, hey, most jobs have some form of seasonality. So can we flex talent from, low tides to high tides across the business? And that's a form of agility that we're working on, which, by the way, also helps cross-train people too. So a lot of extra, it can be very engaging for folks to get more experience. So lots of benefits to the borrow lever. And there's a fourth one though, which I think would probably be like kind of the obvious one for Zapier. We call it bot, right? And that's like automation, AI, like et cetera. And one call to action I would have for really any of our organizations, it's one we ask of ourselves too, is you take those 4 Bs for any need in the organization, build, buy, borrow, and bot. I think it's really important for leaders to the company to have a point of view to stack rank this. When we have a need, what is the first thing we think of? What's the second, the third, and the fourth? The stack rank amongst those 4 things is going to look somewhat different depending on each company. That's actually it's not a rhetorical question. It's a non-obvious answer, which is why it's such an important question. Yeah. So it's a big recommendation, something that we've thought about. And I think that's just incredibly helpful in this moment, especially if you can be transparent with your team about your answer to a question like that, because then when they see things happen across the business, they can tie it back to something you've already told them. And so instead of being confused or being a moment of distrust, because they're not sure what sense to make, it is actually a moment of credibility because they're seeing follow through. Some other examples of this, for example, you can do operationally is, when we have a role open, like when someone leaves the company, we do not automatically backfill it. If it's a performance exit, we want to encourage good performance management. So if it's a performance exit, you do get the backfill, but you still have to work with your business partner on the best way to do so rather than just presuming a carbon copy. So we still ask for the thought exercise. But for non-performance exits, you actually don't get it back until you re-justify it. We've done that as part of this kind of really challenge to ourselves to like think through the 4Bs, before you even apply for any head, for a backfill, first think about, whether there's the different way to do it. Because in some cases, it's been a number of years since you hired that role in the first place.
I love that framework. Yeah. The build, buy, borrow, buy. And it would be interesting in practice, as you share, like on one end, what's the reactionary answer to that? Like, where does your gut and your reaction right off the top of your head go to if you were to stack that? But then you go, okay, but actually for our business, for our industry, for our current strategy, what should that be in order? And I think that's a really powerful practice. So, well, this has been a blast. And I would love to ask you a final question in the ethos of transform and thinking about the transformation of people strategy, of people tech, and all the different topics that we're unpacking here. What is a bold kind of outlook, challenge, strategy, something that comes top of mind for you for organizations to be thinking about to stay ahead of the curve, to be on top of things as we go into the future?
Yeah. Here's my number one, and I wake up thinking about it every day. It's ultimately really exciting. Where our current employees spend their next few years is going to have such a big influence over, their next 10, 20 for all the reasons we talked about today. And that can feel like a lot of weight on our shoulders. And it kind of is. So I think it's a healthy kind of weight to put on ourselves, because the upshot there is if you can be one of the few companies that can credibly show that the next 2 or 3 years in your organization is going to be the rocket fuel, right? That like you will be truly elite because we're investing in you in ways that are great for the customer. They're great for the business. They're going to be great for you too. And here's what we mean by that. That's a great talent indication.
Yeah. It sounds like for the next 2 years, right, will be a very critical time for companies to build that competitive edge, that special sauce to their culture and their business that will catapult them in the future. So thanks for sharing these perspectives, these strategies, the models too, that people can refer to unpack these things within your own company and really role modeling the way as a company and a leader. So I appreciate you taking some time and being part of the series.
Yeah, you bet. We're learning a lot too. It's fun.
Got 5 B's now. So we have Brandon.
And Brandon,
Yes.
the last B. You got to call.
This should be your last option.
I'll bring it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Sounds great.
Thanks.